Okay, here's a new article in from the Israel area. This now is known as the world's oldest crown. It's approximately 6,000 years old, or 4,000 BC. And all the artifacts that are associated with it date between 3,500 and 4,000 BC. This is before the Bronze Age, and is in an age known as the Chalcolithic, which really just means Copper Age. But it means Copper Stone Age, for they're using the word lithic. But if you look at most archaeological sites during this time, they don't give a civilization that would have anything like this in comparison. We've looked at a few sites and things where it pushes the boundaries of this, that, and the other. Ancient people living around the Mediterranean and what they had found of a time between now and, say, the Younger Dryas event that we've looked at. When you look at something like this, it seems to almost, like in many cultures, come out of nowhere. It looks somewhat like some type of Scythian gold work. Well, it's nowhere near that intricate, but it does show a few telling signs on it here. For it looks like a modius. We've talked about a modius before, but that's just a little grain type of container, and then they're using that for a crown, usually signifying a goddess or god of grain. But this thing here almost looks like, well, let me just go down a hair. This thing here almost looks like it's really a car tire rim without the tire on it. It's really kind of shaped like that. Kind of odd. We can see these zigzag marks that are in here. Ching, 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 zigzag marks. Something that I made the remark to one guy that was a little too snooty, I guess. One time as being marks that look very much like Charlie Brown's shirt. We can see that type of pottery and where it ran up into old Proto-Indo-European lands and so on, and its moving of people that are said to go across and it moved west. But when we see something like this here, we can also probably make connections to a people that are around areas like Catalhoyuk and people like that. And most people realize that a lot of the steelworking that came in this area apparently came with these people and these Hittites that used to be up in Anatolian area and so on. The oddity here, again, is that this is found down in the Dead Sea area. Yeah, much like those scrolls, so those things sure get popular in those caves and what they find in those caves. Or if we look at this thing before we get into it here, well, let's see if I can put it in the right spot for you. What we're seeing here is two goose-like objects here, and so we can only guess that this is the front, and the back has an open hole into it. Wouldn't be surprised if it went the other way, but then there's not any design on the front really, and on the back it ends up having geese or ducks that are here. This one looks a little more like a turkey with a wattle under his throat, but this one here almost looks like those ones that are on the Gobekli Tepe pillars that are on the famous pillar of the vultures and so on that we've talked about and seen in some extra videos. There's also a couple little odd looking things here. For it really, to me, looks like this is an ancient doorway and this is an ancient doorway, and you can see it passes through in the in-between, so it's a squared type object, right? Around this doorway are all these pegs. I don't know if these pegs had something on them or if these pegs were wrapped from this side to this side back and forth with something, who knows, colored twine or something of one type, or maybe a fur of some type. For you would think that down here at the very bottom we were looking at a minute ago, the way it flares out there, it's going to be kind of rough on that king's head, and so it'd probably have leather on it, maybe even bound over again with fur or something that's on it. Who knows, but at one time it may have had fur over a large part of it. But all that's long gone. But it's amazing how in this very arid desert environment, some of things like this were allowed by time to last. Because if we would have had something like this up in, say, I don't know, Europe, most any place, with the humidity levels and things like that, it probably would have rotted away long ago, turned green and basically into a pile of just about nothing, like a lot of the swords and things that we find back there, and it's just crumbled in pretty much the shape of where it is, or you might find just the hilt that's made of gold and some scraps hooked up to it. But in this depiction we have these ram horn type creatures that are at the top of each one of these. They're over doorways, and this reminds me of like cattle hoyok in the area where people seem like they're already starting to make that cowboy look, because they had the bull horns and different animal horns above their mantles and so on. That's very reminiscent of what you would think of as modern western cowboy look to a house, but way back when. But we've made that cowboy connection. In fact, covered wagons being pulled by a horse that's been domesticated by people riding horses and probably yelling out "Hi-yah" is something that goes way the hell back to ancient Scythians and people that actually seem to have been the ones that domesticated horses in the first place. But the other oddity that's on this helmet, if you haven't noticed it yet, is this right here. For it looks very much like a tack, just stuck into the back of it. And if you look, it almost looks like there's a little sconce where it sticks in. And I don't know if it's two separate pieces and one day after being in there for so long it just fused into it or not. But the little back edging that's right here seems to show almost a welding to me, but I don't get a close look at it or even a 3D-ish representation to make that judgment. There does appear to be that sconce that's there and some notches where sconce type things were at one time around on this, and it's missing a square. Not that anything's missing, but it could have been an insert, and that insert could have been ivory and had symbols on it or something like that. Only showing a few pieces in this article here, but there are quite a few, I think some 400 and something pieces found in this cache here. So one dreams of finding the ancient treasure chest, and this is something way back. Ancient treasures, in fact, it's much farther back than people give credit for, and it has some pretty neat artifacts in the craftsmanship that it shows here. And this does kind of go along with that video that I did at the beginning of the year, where they had stated they had found genetics of people coming in with blonde and blue hair and so on like that into this area approximately this same time, and so you might make a correlation or connection with those two also. For later they become pretty important people. The 6,000-year-old crown found in the Dead Sea Cave. Well, the oldest known crown in the world, which was famously discovered in 1961 as part of the Mahal Mishmar hoard, along with numerous other treasured artifacts, was recently revealed in New York University's Institute for the Study of Ancient World as part of the Masters of Fire Copper Age Art from Israel exhibit. And I really do want to see that. I'm going to try to look up and see if I can find somebody YouTubing where they went through and looked at the exhibit, and hopefully they didn't go flash, 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 walk out like a lot of them do, but they tried to get a good look at things. The ancient crown dates back to the Copper Age between 4000 and 3500 BC and is just one out of more than 400 artifacts that were recovered in a cave in the Judean desert near the Dead Sea more than half a century ago. The crown is shaped like a thick ring and features vultures, so they're calling those vultures, just like on the vulture stele, and doors protruding from the top. It is believed that it played a part in burial ceremonies for the people of importance at the time. And whenever we talk about ancient false doorways and portals and things, it goes along with that. But then you can see also the horn that's over on that too and stuff. Well, how far does it go back? Well, I'm willing to believe that it goes back tens of thousands of years, with people perhaps having a horned hat on, something you'd think of Fred Flintstone with a Grand Poobah type hat on. But then again, that is eerily reminiscent of Vikings that seem to be a much more modern age from where we're talking now. Definitely. This also blows out of the water, of course, the mythology that Nimrod was the first person to ever have a crown on him and so, da da da, written in the stars, and well, because, well, now this predates that, almost doubles that date. Thinking about this date here, 4000, 3500 BC, it's quite a bit before the ancient pyramids are being built. So we don't find much copper work in the Egyptians, and in fact not very much around the world at this time. But we do find a few special places, and eerily these don't seem to be like they just kind of started doing it. Does it at all? University wrote, an object of enormous power and prestige, the blackened, raggedy, cast copper crown. So it's casted, they believe, from the Mahal Mishmar hoard greets the visitor to masters of fire. The enigmatic protuberance along its rim of vultures and building facades with squarish apertures, and its cylindrical shape suggests links to the burial practices of the time. Well, what gives you that? Well, it's the rim with vultures on it, and the ancient symbology that many people have put together, where vultures who helped become our angels in the way we look at it today and still keep this animism is hooked up to an ancient time where vultures and birds that are like that clean up carrion would take somebody from a dais and then take you up into heaven, albeit piece by piece. Lacuna. The Nahal Mishmar hoard was found by archaeologist Pesah Bar Adon, hidden in a natural crevice and wrapped in straw mat in a cave in the northern side of Nahal Mishmar, which has become known as the Cave of Treasures, probably for pretty good reasons. The 442 prized artifacts made from copper, bronze, ivory, and stone include 240 mace heads. Take a look at those in a second. 100 scepters, 5 crowns, not just that one, powder horns, tools, and weapons. And albeit that some of these things just push the boundaries far back on what people were supposedly capable of this time. If you look here, and you see these scepter handles and things that they have going on here, look much like a candlestick, and these things are woven and twisted, things along that nature. For a lot of them have weird multiple heads shaped onto them. But you can also see a basket that's right here, and much like they do out of stonework to show you impressive, now you can do it in clay, I can do it in metal. Here's a woven basket, and it's got that reed formation around onto it, where it's mimicking somewhat of a woven basket, and it's still not. Predominant rim around on that thing too. And so this again looks like pottery somehow from the very early, not pre-pottery Neolithic, but potterish Neolithic of people up from the north. But strange artifacts that are in here. Look in the center of this, and there's this 4-headed dumbbell that's like here. Let's look in this group here, and you'll find a bunch of mace heads. This one is very conspicuously shaped, but most of these really look like little beads. Perhaps it went over a god's necklace, that the god was huge. But instead, They're really a mace head. So maces and scepters, and they're aging and things, of course. And here we see this symbology, and these mace heads look exactly the shape of mace heads that they find in earliest of Egypt and so on, but generally of ivory in other situations. Perhaps they continually reused and therefore didn't leave artifacts back behind, but very few. For the earliest statues have these copper eyes that go around them that are inset with that stone and those blue crystals and everything that I keep talking about and showing in a lot of my videos. There's not much work there, but you know that they, to build those pyramids, would have had to have a hell of a lot of tools made out of this, and not just this form, but even hardened, or they wouldn't have been able to perform it in any way, shape, or form. Another conspicuous one is this one right here that has a horn point on it. For if that's a scepter head, it's got a killing point on it, much like they used for cattle and things like that, perhaps for sacrifices. One would like to think that actually they just took that and nailed it into the wall, and that was really just a sconce for a torch or some type of candle holder. I don't think so. Some of these things down here look like candle holders, even in a modern day type look, doesn't it? And there's that conspicuous little pitcher that everybody carries around with them too, of water. And Jack and Jill went up a hill. But there's hundreds more of these mace heads alone, but all these different shapes of things. And I'd really like to see these other 4 crowns they've got, and this powder horns, by the way, I blew right past. For I'm a kid of the days of Davy Crockett and so on, and from the TV show, of course, not the real thing. And powder horn means something totally different to me, and different to anybody that studied anything all the way back for just a few hundred years, and then it drifts off to not meaning the same thing. And I wonder what kind of powder they have in there. They say weapons, but a scepter can actually be a weapon. In fact, these mace heads definitely can be a weapon. And that's the same mace heads that are quite often seen in that Orion pose that you see in the ancient Egyptians and so on. But that's thousands of years later than this. What's strange is they also said 442 prize artifacts made from copper, bronze, ivory. Well, the Bronze Age doesn't start. Oh man, did we just wreck that whole idea too? Because you can tell these people aren't like the people that even within their lifetime perhaps started messing with copper. But they mentioned bronze, ivory and stone. Sure, but we don't want to say those two in the same and then put this date on it, but they definitely are doing it right here now. Bronze. One wonders what they really meant by powder horns. One wonders what they mean by tools. Carbon-14 dating of the reed mat, which the objects were wrapped in, suggests that it dates to at least 3500 BC. And of course, they're going to take that dating pretty much because it's OOP-hearted. If it wasn't, whatever boundary it was within, it would push it. But because it's pushed a boundary, they're going to go with the weakest number. It was in this period that the use of copper became widespread throughout the Levant, attesting to considerable technological developments that parallel major social advances in the region. And here we start to see something that kind of goes with a biblical timeline, but a people coming up out of nowhere. Well, there's already people around, but this shows you integration of some people that are really having it go on. And you could say, well, they were there and it popped up like popcorn. Or you can go with the genetic idea of these people that came in that apparently showed this from up north. Some of these objects are like nothing ever seen anywhere else. The round knobs are usually said to be mace heads, but there's no evidence any of them were ever used in combat. Perhaps they were ceremonial and part of a cachet that was not really for that. The remaining objects are even more unusual and unique in style, such as the bronze scepter depicted below. So we look at this bronze scepter here, and you can see that again we have this Ares type depiction of these horned creatures here with their heads going out in all different directions. But the one facing here has that ibex type curly horn that goes woo woo and comes out and has a whip to it. There's not an inset jewel or any encrusting things like that, but oddly, this is very reminiscent of the scepter that I gave my D&D campaign about, the scepter of Orcus. Now in my D&D game that I play, there's the wand of Orcus and you get a shard of it. And just getting a shard of it causes this thing extra to happen for you. For if you had the whole thing, you couldn't handle it. Kind of like Lord of the Rings. But here we have very much something that's like the scepter of Orcus. And I'm not talking about people from the Orkney Islands necessarily, but wow, look at that craftsmanship of a time where what? Now this is different and displayed at the Hecht Museum in Haifa. The objects in the Mahal Mishmar hoard appeared to have been hurriedly collected, leading to the suggestion that the artifacts were sacred treasures belonging to the abandoned Chalcolithic temple of Ein Gedi that's some 12 kilometers or 5.5 miles away, which may have been hidden in the cave during a time of emergency or great strife. That's very reminiscent of the same tale that goes along with, of course, the Dead Sea Scrolls and things along that line, for it looked like the Essenes knew it was all going to go away and went and hid some stuff. But in that version, the treasures were actually written down ancient tales and not so much of this, which look like it's artifacts to go with sacred ceremonies and so on. In a time way, way before any of that crap that you're thinking of now, huh? Now wrap your head around the dating on this again and think about it. But we're way, way before the pyramids were created. Before the Sumerians came into power. Here we have something like this. Lacuna. So here we have this temple of Ein Gedi that's up here that they've dated to this date. And this cave is not there. It's somewhere just out of sight, where even if you were trying to look in the direction they told you it was, it's about 5.5, 6 miles away. You're not going to see it. But I see down below me palm tree setups and orchards. What I'm visioning to be grapes, dates, things along that line. And boy, that probably dates to a lot older than we thought too. It's another one of those situations with my old catchphrase where we get to go back a lot earlier than people thought. And I'm wondering what the hell this bronze is that's dating here at 4000 BC. Kind of strange. Powder horn I can get over because they're going to say some other type of powder is in it, of course, and not gun powder, for that's the powder that's usually found in powder horns. So there's this site here. I don't know what it's aligned to, and I can't tell from it necessarily, but it looks like they have basically squared off walls, but then another area that is square over at the more left-hand side of it that's off-kicked somewhat. Then it looks like there's a hearth or something that used to go along here. And this is just the edging of some walls. Those walls and the doorway that went along with those walls apparently is already something that we think of in a modern day, or we think of thousands of years later starting to be in some buildings and things. But of course, people that used to build with wood a long time ago, that crap's long gone. But the formation of wood and the way it looks, and Jesus Christ was a carpenter, right? And well, that's only zero. We're talking about 4,000 BC. So that's the one above modern kibbutz Ein Gedi. Daniel Masters, professor of archaeology at Wheaton College and a member of the curatorial team, said the fascinating thing about this period is that a burst of innovation defined the technologies of the ancient world for thousands of years. I'm going to tell you again that doesn't look like they just come up with that crap. Put down in the comments what you think about it. Does it look like they just came up with being able to do it? They're talking about casting, and so we'd probably have to talk about beeswax and reverse casting situations going on, and this is in no way at the starting point of something like this. And the perfection seen in the mace heads and all these other things show you that that wasn't brand new either, was it? Jennifer Chi, I Saw exhibitions director and the chief curator, added, to the modern eye, it's stunning to see how these groups of people, already mastering so many new social systems and technologies, still had the ability to create objects of enduring artistic interest. Well, yeah, well, it depends on when you go with. For whenever I was younger, they were talking that people didn't even have really gardens going on or any type of aquaculture going on. But then through the looking glass here of all these years, we come to find it goes back all the way edging on Gobekli Tepe at 10,500 BC, and it at least is with the Catalhoyuk type people. Strangely, Cro-Magnon man is as early its dates to showing a non-prognostic jaw, relating that something like that, whether there's a lot of hunting and gathering still going on, there's something much more like that, or a modern society going along with that, than people are willing to give credit for. But when we find something that's 4,000 BC as this level of workmanship, it's, I mean, it's one of those things where you get people to looking kind of weird. What finds out, even weirder than it pushes back the whole situation is, along with these artifacts, which might have been some type of, arsenic cured and hardened type copper, we're finding brass, or what you would know of as bronze, they said here too, and that almost makes no sense, except for the fact that things go back much, much earlier than they're willing to try to talk about, and we keep finding, well, they didn't have snowballs back then. Well, there's another snowball in hell. Well, they don't have snowballs in hell. There's one. Here's another. Purpose and origin of the hoard remains a mystery, they say. And the featured first image was the oldest crown in the world, found in the Mahal Mishmar hoard. And you can find in Wikipedia and Wikimedia, they already got an article into there, and this shows you some of the people that are putting in articles are people that are hooked up with some of the archaeology and adding to it. And that's the reason there's so many modern changes to Wikipedia. I've done 4 or 5 videos here recently where it's just the same stuff I was talking about, but now you can see that stuff I was talking about, and I went here and here and there and all the things and did a magic trick to try to show you. They're saying in pretty much all of it right here. Yeah, it's kind of a verifier video. But this is a verifier of a different sort, isn't it? So that is looking like those buzzards. Especially this one right here. And those ancient doorways. Sacred doorways of time and space. Life and death and the way it goes through. And there's 2 doorways crossing over the king's head and his mind. Or whoever is using this. And what has the giant tack got to do with it? Because that's such a huge tack. That is none other than a nail. There's a nail stuck in his head. What the hell is that? Anybody want to expand on the thoughts of it? I haven't spent much time yet, but what the hell? So this modius type apparatus, saying it's all cast, and I don't know if the individual things around on it have been welded to it, or if they're saying this is all cast together, because as they're saying it's all cast together, this far surpasses the first generation of people that started to try to even do casting, much less brass work or copper work, chalcolithic, if you will. The fact that they got doorways shows you a lot about that lithic too. But Neolithic just means new or modern form of stoneworking, not just a Stone Age man, but here he came on with a lot of new stuff. Well, that dates way, way back, but when we start talking about the ages of metal and the ages of man, it's funny how it keeps changing. Funny how it keeps getting closer to projected things that just not too many years ago were considered to be, oh man, you're crazy. Well, here it is. One of them snowballs again. Am I crazy? Is everybody crazy? Or is there some sense and some veil being lifted? I want to see the rest of the exhibits too, so there might be even another appendix to come out on this and add on a part 2, if you will, but it'll probably be somewhat separate. I'll just make a reference back to this, but I'm sure in those pictures might be a couple of these pictures here, and that'll work out well. The only other article I find on this right now is very wordy and no pictures at all, and some descriptions of stuff that's like, well, what do you mean? What does it look like? Well, wow. Really? So where are these tools at? I got a tack that looks just like that stuck in my wall right over there. Except it's got a green head on it. Got horns like that out in my garage that could be over my mantelpiece too, but wouldn't necessarily put it over the direct doorway. Animal sacrifices, doorways. Like, share, and subscribe, guys. Moving on. Peace.